Well, joining me now are two journalists with the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Mia Rabson is a national political reporter with the Canadian Press, and Tonda MacCharles is a parliamentary reporter for the Toronto Star. Both of you, thanks for joining us.
Hi.
Well, listen, both of you have been reporting on this since the very first day of the pandemic, because I know you've been on this. And my question to you is, we are now at a point where vaccines have taken up so much of the attention, and politically as well. There's a lot we know. There's a lot of unanswered questions. My question to the two of you who've been following this is, for what is unanswered, is it reasonable that it's unanswered, or is there reason for the politicians to be pressing and upset? Mia.
I'd say some of it is probably reasonable. I think it's understandable that we don't have exactly the dates on when everything's going to be delivered, because there is a lot of uncertainty both from the companies and on the approval side. So my understanding is that the government, or that Pfizer or Moderna, whichever company we're talking about, isn't going to say we're delivering them on this date until Health Canada says we have approved it and you're sort of good to go. These vaccines are so delicate, the Pfizer one in particular, and has to be stored at such low temperatures. One of the guidelines, for example, is it's in a special box. It can't be opened more than twice a day for 1 minute at a time, or the vials inside might actually be considered to be damaged, and not usable. So they're being so careful about that, because the preciseness of how all of this has to be run down is very, very tricky. That said, there is some more information that the government probably could be giving us. We know, for example, now that there are 6 million doses in the first quarter. The government didn't tell us that. The Ontario government ended up telling us that. The federal government didn't. So there is some information that they probably could be giving us, and more answers, or even saying a little bit more specific, even if it can't be a specific date. Mm-hmm. So some of it's reasonable, some of it's not.
Tonda, I mean, for one of the examples, though, I mean, one of the sticking points politically, Tonda, this week has been people saying, okay, we know that you can't tell us exactly when the first vials of vaccine will arrive, but give us a play date after that. There's got to be, give us the day 1, day 2, day 3. Give us your game plan. Is that a fair criticism?
Right, and I think that, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole did that in the House of Commons, right? He said, well, most military planners will say, okay, if you don't know the exact date, take it from a theoretical date and then go out day 1, day 2, date plus 1 day, date plus 2 days. What does it look like? I think those details we don't have, and it makes everybody wonder, does the government even have them? In other words, does the government have that kind of specificity, if I could call it that, specific date of delivery in the contract itself? Or are we depending quite a bit on the goodwill of the company to deliver sort of grosso modo, more or less the big package? And we're already hearing that they're going to be, it's all like Mia described, right? It's going to be a staggered delivery out over the next 3 months. So there are things we don't know that we could know, that we should know. Is there a reason we don't know it? I mean, look, reporters and opposition politicians have been demanding answers. They're very cagey. I'm not sure how much of that is tied to their intent to not make it seem like a foregone conclusion. In other words, that the regulators will independently make a decision irrespective of political pressure, right? So I think that there's a bit of that at play.
What about the idea, too, which people are trying to get their heads around, and that is that when the first shipments arrive, they will be nowhere near fulfilling the need. And we today got this recommendations from the National Committee on Immunization about the target groups, which didn't surprise anyone, the elderly in care homes, in care settings, and elder people, 70 years or older with a preference 80, healthcare workers, and adult Indigenous people. We got those guidelines, but there's a lot of even harder decisions still to be made at the provincial level when it becomes obvious that we don't have enough even maybe for those groups.
Well, Theresa Tam, the Chief Public Health Officer, was asked today if this 6 million doses is going to be enough just to cover even that group of people. And she said that it should be, that those guidelines were kind of set up knowing we were going to get this many doses with some modeling about uptake. So it should cover that group. I mean, whether or not we had more doses coming to us in the first 6 months or first 3 months, whenever the period is. When you're rolling out a vaccine program, you can never vaccinate everybody at once. Even 10 years ago during H1N1, they had to have priority groups for vaccination because there's only so much that can be produced and shipped and even used at a time. So that sort of is normal. The question is, how will the provinces actually use those guidelines? Some of them did back in 2009. Some of them did not. Okay. So are the provinces going to use those guidelines? And now that they have them, when are we going to see from each province province how they're going to use them. I mean, people want to know, when am I going to get vaccinated? When is my mother, who's in a long-term care home, going to get vaccinated, that I might actually be able to go see her? So those are questions that people they're desperate. I mean, the anxiety around this is so huge. So every little tidbit of information is so important right now.
Both of you are at the briefings, like Tonda, you were at the briefing yesterday by the now weekly briefings on the vaccine, state of vaccines in Canada. And there's Major General Danny Fortin giving details. Are they going a long way or not to answering some of the vital questions? Is it helping?
They are. No, look, it's the first. Well, first of all, it was only the second technical briefing. Yeah. Since they've been working on it apparently since April. So it would have been nice to have had something along these lines much earlier. And we might have actually stemmed some of the questions. But no, it's useful because Danny Fortin gave us quite a bit of information yesterday, from the number of sites that are going to be the first receivers of a Pfizer vaccine, and then how many sites they're going to ramp up to in order to accommodate the Moderna and whatever other vaccines eventually get approved. There was quite a bit of detail in terms of the planning that they're doing and what they're trying to foresee. Look, these are details that the government, according to the government, since they started negotiating and started to sign contracts since August, could have rolled out a lot of this detail a lot earlier. Instead, I think the political pressure is built on them. They're seen now to be reacting to it. But more importantly, I think some of the public anxiety around it might have been I think, curbed a bit. So, that's on them.
Okay, a question. We only have about a minute and a half left. Mia, I have to ask you this because I know so many years of reporting for the Winnipeg Free Press. Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister made some comments yesterday, and I'm still trying to make heads or tails of them, where he says he's concerned by the fact that a certain proportion of vaccines to Manitoba will be cleaved off to give to Indigenous communities, and he's concerned that that could be taken away from the overall per capita allocation to Manitoba. Those comments are setting off sparks. What do we make of them, and are there going to be other comments from premiers questioning the allocation of vaccines like that?
Well, I think Premier Pallister will have to explain what he meant by that. I think there are some who are wondering if he's suggesting that people who are living in the Indigenous communities shouldn't be getting this vaccine earlier. I mean, they were among the priority groups. He seemed to maybe be worried that Manitoba was going to get less overall but it doesn't necessarily make sense on that front, just because these are people who live in Manitoba and are still Manitobans. So he will have to explain specifically what he meant by that. I do think that, again, it comes down to the provinces want to know how much they're getting. They're the ones who actually have to get it into people's arms. Yeah. This is the one thing people don't always remember. Ottawa's approving the vaccine. Ottawa's buying the vaccine. The provinces are the ones who have to actually then distribute it to people and get it into arms. That is a very complex process to do. And if they don't know how many people, or how many doses they're going to get, they can't really plan for that. And so this is a little bit of that anxiety as well.
Okay, last thought to you on this topic, Tonda.
Well, look, again, I think that there's a need for transparency on the federal government side for them to tell us what their view of that is. How much should go out on a per capita basis? How much should go out on the basis of, say, how bad the outbreak is in a certain province or region of the country? Newfoundland's got a pretty good disease picture right now. They don't have a lot. I think they have 1 or 2 cases or something.
Yeah.
So does it make sense to heave a whole bunch of vaccination down to a place where they really don't have a huge outbreak right now? Or does it make sense to ship it to where it's really needed most, in a province or a region or a community where they're smothering under COVID?
All of these questions you can ask at next week's briefing on vaccines. Okay, both of you, I want to thank you very much for taking the time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good weekend, guys.